Hey there, YouTube friends. Got a small beginner project involving some wiring on my Jeep J-20. A couple of things are wrong with it, and it came to me that way, so it's time to now fix it. First, I got marker lights to repair. The lights for the tail light are out. The wiring to the back tail lights has been tapped into and mangled in the process, so I've got to fix that. And I also have a front turn signal where the entire housing and associated wiring needs to be replaced. I'll walk you through the steps involved in each of those repairs. None of them are very hard. All of them can be accomplished by a beginner. You only need a few simple tools. If you have those tools, you take your time, you can fix your car or your truck, make it as good as new. Well, better than it is now. Alright, so follow along. I'll walk you through the steps. First thing we're going to begin with is the license plate lights.
Well, you might say to yourself, Dr. Bob, why do I have to replace both my lights? Can't I just take a new light, put it into the open hole? Well, the existing light is not in very good shape. You actually need a wire. They don't have Bluetooth connectivity for license plate lights. So I've got a pair of license plate lights, and let me take you off of that mount and show you underneath what it's going to have to connect to. Come on under. Here we go. Right up under here. I got a little connector. This is for the illumination. It comes from the tail lights, and it's supposed to go to the license plate light. But this was empty. This was broken off. Well, there was a little spade terminal in there, which is not exactly how the factory connected it. The factory connected it using a GM style connector. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that here, and then I'm going to run two separate wires, one to each of my license plate lights. Now, where to get connectors? This is a GM type connector. It's got a male spade terminal inside, a Type 56 Packard connector, and I could just solder this on to the two wires coming out of the license plate lights. It only needs a power because it takes the ground through the mounting surface here. But I got a better idea. One of my wiring terminals that I cut off from a wiring harness already has the Packard Type 56 connector that I need in a different housing, but I can remove it from this housing and put it into this housing, and then connect some bullet connector receptacles to each of these wires. Put the corresponding bullet type connectors on the end of the wires from the tail light, from the license plate light themselves, and then I'll have just three connections. No soldering necessary, just some crimping in, some liquid electrical tape and some shrink wrap. Let's show you what it's going to look like. These GM Type 56 connectors, for the male terminals at least, have a spade that comes in, and then you expand one of the legs of that spade to keep it stuck in the housing. To take it out, you just squeeze that spade down. That little part there that was contacting the housing moves out of the way, so you can just pull it right out of the housing. And let me show you on the connector we're going to use. This connector has the same thing. I'm going to just squeeze that male terminal and slide it right out. Installation is going to be the reverse. I'm going to slide this connector in and then just expand that, and it's not going to be able to come out. There you go. That's all the magic in inserting a male connector into a GM type wiring housing. Let's take a closer look at the connection of a factory style GM Type 56 Packard connector. The main difference between a factory style connector and an aftermarket crimp connector is going to be how well it attaches to a wire. A factory style connector is going to crimp not only to the wire itself, but also to the insulation, so that the connector is going to be supported at 2 points. So let's release this connector and take a look. You push down on the tab that is locking it into place. So inside here, I'm pushing down on that tab and pulling it out. And you can see it's not only crimped around the wire with this smaller crimp here, it's crimped around the insulation. That gives you a much stronger connection. The copper of the wire is not the only thing connecting the wire to the connector. For the male type connector, you don't release it by a tang, you release it by squeezing this tab in and sliding it out. To lock it into place, you put a screwdriver in there and twist it out, and that little bit right there is going to grab on the inside of the housing and lock that into place. When you plug these two connectors together, they go together like that. And note, they're supported at the wire insulation as well as the copper itself. So let me just demonstrate with one of these connectors how those two crimps work. I like to crimp it first on the insulation. So I get it into this crimper. This is different from the standard crimper you use for butt connectors. Butt connectors, or these kind of connectors, just crush the whole housing down around the wire. But it's only around the copper. The insulation is unattached, so that wire can stretch and break free from the connector. This type doesn't just crush the housing. It doesn't crush the connector, but rather it has two little loops in the upper part here. So I get it into the crimper. I put my wire into the connector so that the insulation goes all the way up to the next connector. And make sure not to crimp both connectors at the same time. And then you can see in there it crimped both those little tabs over the insulation itself. I'll do the same thing for the wire section. If your tool is working properly, what it's going to do is crimp both tabs downward into the wire itself. So you can see that's a much stronger connector. And if I want to put it into a housing, it just snaps right into place. If I want to install one of these in a housing, I slide it into place and then expand the inner part of it until it grabs. And that way I can plug the connector together, get a nice tight fit. That's why I prefer using factory type connectors whenever possible. Now I'm actually going to clip the wires on outside with this connector outside of the housing and make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to strip back the wires, crimp on the female bullet receptacle, use some shrink wrap to keep it, and some liquid electrical tape to keep it as weather tight as possible, and then put it all back together. Okay, let's show you the process of adding a bullet connector to the end of this standard S40 license plate light. First, they do have a spade connector. You can just use that, but that's not very secure. That could slip out of whatever you plug it into. So I clip off that. I strip about enough for it to go into a bullet connector that will just crimp on the end of it. And here we are. Make sure it's seated fully. And again, for the beginners, these are color coded. This is an 18 gauge wire. The 18 gauge wire goes into a red connector. The red connector on this crimper has a little space. It shares the space with the blue, but the red goes a little further out. So you crimp it. I don't know if you can see that step in the housing. That's where the metal begins. It's just slightly above that. And then squeeze it. It'll deform the plastic and deform the metal inside the plastic until it stops. Give it a tug. If it doesn't come out, it's probably good. There we go. That's all it takes to crimp on a connector. Now, I want to make this a little more weather tight, and you can see how that's open in the back there. Liquid electrical tape is a wonderful thing. You can put a little bit of that around an opening like this. And then just wiggle that around, and you can see it sinks down into that housing, forming a weather-tight seal, or at least as weather-tight as the factory connection would have been. In fact, probably more weather-tight. Now, for extra security, once this sets in a little bit, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit more. You'll see why in a second. That's not in focus, is it? Let me show it to you from this angle. That might be more in focus. A little bit more around there. So what I'm going to do is slide a bit of shrink wrap around this. There we go. See that there? Shrink wrap is a plastic sleeve that when you heat it up, not surprisingly, according to its name, it shrinks. It's going to shrink tight around this connector and around that liquid electrical tape that I just put on there. All right, you see the liquid electrical tape bubbling out? That's a sign that you've got it heated around all there, and that liquid electrical tape is going to seal between the wire and the inside of that shrink wrap. They do sell weather-tight shrink wrap. This is not one of those, but you can imitate a weather-tight shrink wrap by using liquid electrical tape around the wire that you are putting the tape around, and then heating it around there. All right, time to plug it all in. All right, I have both of my replacement lights. I have the bullet connectors crimped and then shrink wrapped on the ends. All I've got to do is feed these lights through the holes, and on this bumper at least, there's a little tang that lines up with the open end around these prongs that just grab the inside of that hole. So, line that up and push it through the hole. These little crimpers, or whatever they're called, grab the edge of the hole. Make sure there's some metal contact there. There we go. Then, here is that connector, the GM type connector, with that original spade type 56 terminal in there. I have crimped and then sealed with some liquid electrical tape the bullet connectors that are going to match up. Now what I want to do is I want to seal between that connection and this. I'm going to use a bit of liquid. I'm going to use a bit of dielectric grease just to help it seal. So I'm going to put a little bit of this dielectric grease around the perimeter of each of these bullet connector receptacles so that when I plug this in, there's going to be a chance of it sealing around there. Plug in each one. And then come on underneath for the final plug-in. See that connector there? That's going to go. See if I can do this one-handed. Into that connector there. And that is it. That's how the factory did it. That's how I'm doing it. Now, if this doesn't work, if one of these lights gets bad, malfunctions, it's easy enough to just pull it out, replace it with another light, snap on, crimp on a bullet connector on the end, and plug it back into the harness. There we go. It works. Yay. Problem solved. That was quick. That was simple. Something you don't have to have someone else do for you. All you need is a crimper, some liquid electrical tape, and some bullet connectors. You can be back in business with illuminated license plate. Well, I hope you found that helpful. Good luck to you.